Hello. So in this video, we're going to quickly go through the different types of blood vessels that are found in the circulatory system. And then we're also going to be talking about how we use those blood vessels to maintain our body temperature. So we're going to start off with the arteries. So arteries are meant to carry blood away from the heart, and they are super, super thick. Their walls are super thick and they're very elastic, which means they're super stretchy. And this makes sure that this can help with pushing the blood in the right direction so that it doesn't go backwards, it only goes forwards. And talking about the elastic and the stretchiness of the arteries, this is where you feel a pulse. So pulse is caused by that elastic wall expanding and contracting as blood gets pushed out of the heart and goes kind of through your body. So if you're feeling it on your wrist, you're feeling an artery on your wrist, and you're feeling the blood moving through that artery. It's expanding the wall of it as the blood moves through into your hand. Or if you're feeling it in your neck, same thing. You're feeling the carotid artery in your neck normally when you're feeling their pulse, and you would be using the carotid artery to kind of measure how many beats per minute you're getting, and you're feeling the blood move past, like a little bubble of blood kind of moving past your finger. So a pulse is different than a heartbeat. A heartbeat is actually what's happening at your heart. A pulse is happening in the arteries outside of your heart. So all of the arteries are going to be going through this process, and you would feel a pulse in any artery that you have in your body. We also have a vein, lots of different veins. So veins are the opposite. They take blood towards the heart. And they're a little bit different because they have really, really thin walls. They're not very elastic. The inside of a vein is a lot larger. So if you look at here's an artery, the wall is really large, but that makes the inside of the artery really small. Whereas in a vein, the wall is small, so that makes the inside a little bit larger. And they also have things called one-way valves in them. And these one-way valves help take blood from, for example, our toes all the way back up to our heart, because that's kind of difficult to do because at this point, as it moves through our circulatory system, the blood will eventually be at a complete stop once it gets to our veins. And it's also working against gravity, so it needs these one-way valves in order to basically take blood up our legs. These one-way valves are super important. Over time, if you are someone that stands a lot for your job, so someone like a nurse or a doctor or a teacher or like someone who works in retail or a restaurant, someone that stands like the majority of their day, these one-way valves sometimes can rupture. And so blood can actually get up the vein towards the heart, and it will cause these kind of pooling effect in the vein. They're called varicose veins. And that's what happens when these valves no longer function. So these valves are only found in veins. They're not in arteries. Arteries can use the walls of the actual artery wall. The muscles that are found in them can use that to squeeze and send the blood in the right direction, whereas veins have to use these one-way valves. They also use the muscles that are outside of the vein, so like skeletal muscles, like the biceps or the triceps or the hamstrings or the quads, like big muscles like that, the actual skeletal muscles that are around them will squeeze as we move around and help send the blood up. So they don't actually use the muscle in the wall because it's so tiny. This is the muscle layer in the wall of the vein. It's so small that it wouldn't really allow for blood to get pushed up as good as it does in the artery. So we also have some information about another blood vessel, which is called the capillaries. Capillaries are super tiny. You can see in this picture, they're about the size of one red blood cell to fit through at a time. So if you pulled out a hair from your head, that's about how small a capillary is. And capillaries go through between every single one of our body cells. So depending on where the capillary bed is, that's kind of like just a group of capillaries. Might not be sending blood through it all the time because maybe it's really close to our skin, for example, and we're really cold. We're not going to send blood there at that time, but we can direct blood to certain places in our body if it's important at that time. So, for example, we can use these things called sphincters, which can kind of cut off certain capillary beds if we don't need them. Sometimes we do this, for example, if you've just eaten a large meal, we can shunt the blood towards our digestive system so that it's right going against the intestines so that we get lots of nutrients from that food. Maybe we're not going to send blood as much to other places that are not being used, and we're sending it mostly to the digestive system at that time. So the other thing we need to know about capillaries is they are what join the actual arteries to veins. So if you look here, we have a picture. So an artery would be carrying blood away from the heart. It would travel eventually into an arterial, which is like a small version of an artery, and then into some capillaries. At this point, gas exchange would occur in the body cells or the lungs, depending on where this capillary bed is. And then eventually the blood would continue traveling through the capillary bed into what we call a venule, which is like a small vein, and then into a vein towards our heart. So that is important to know. We are also going to talk about what we call homeostatic regulation. So we have two different versions of that. We're going to start first with A, vasodilation. And you guys can draw this little kind of outline of a picture in the box underneath where it talks about vasodilation. So if we're going to dilate something, that means that it's going to increase in size. So if you're unsure about this word, remember back to, I'm sure you've heard in movies where a woman is giving birth, it says that her cervix has to dilate to 10 centimeters before she can start pushing. So her cervix is enlarging to 10 centimeters. And so if you're unsure about what dilating is, if it's getting smaller or bigger, just remember that kind of example. We would do this if we were really, really hot and we want to get rid of some of that heat. So if we're dilating our capillaries, they would become larger, so they would be a little bit bigger than they normally are. And blood would kind of be able to flow through that capillary bed, which is really close to the surface of our skin. So when that happens and we're able to flow really close to our skin, some of that heat dissipates across the skin. Dissipates just means basically like goes across and disappears into the atmosphere. We also use sweat to help with this process. So we would be sweating on the outside of our skin, and then the sweat would evaporate, and that's what actually helps with the dissipation of heat, because the heat will kind of be trapped within the sweat and it evaporates off our skin into the atmosphere. That's what's taking the heat away. So if we're dilating our capillaries, that means that they're getting larger so that blood can actually flow really close to our skin. And then we can get rid of some of the heat that's built up in our body with the help of sweat as well. So we do this all over our skin. We vasodilate. Other organisms have to use different structures. So for example, there's actually organisms that use their ears. So they send their blood to their ears and they vasodilate the capillaries in their ears, and they use their ear structure to get rid of the heat. Or like a dog, for example, they pant when they're hot, and they actually send lots of the blood that is really warm to their tongue, and they use the saliva on their tongue in order to help with getting rid of that heat. We use sweat all over our skin, so it's a little bit different of a process for us. If we're doing the opposite process, which is called vasoconstriction, so think of like a boa constrictor. They like squeeze around their prey to like basically like suffocate them or kill them. So if we're constricting our blood vessels, it's going to be a lot smaller. So if I compare this picture to this picture, you can see that the capillaries, which are these guys right here, are a lot smaller than they were in this picture. So if I'm vasoconstricting, I'm getting my capillaries to be smaller. I'd be doing this if I was really cold. When I'm cold, I'm going to vasoconstrict, and I'm going to make my vessel smaller so that blood basically just ignores the capillary bed that's close to the skin and stays within the core of my body, which then will conserve heat. So heat would not dissipate across the skin. So you can not write that or just cross it out if you already wrote it down. Okay, this time heat is not dissipating, it's staying in the core of our body so that we can maintain our temperature at 37 degrees. So you would be doing this in the wintertime if you're going outside. This is why sometimes your hands will get really cold in the wintertime, because blood is actually skipping over going into the hands, because all of the vessels in the hands are really close to the skin, or the fingers especially. So your hands will get a lot colder than maybe your torso, because you're not getting the same amount of blood supply to that area. So that is how vasoconstriction and vasodilation work. And I just wanted to mention there's two different substances that humans sometimes ingest. Alcohol and nicotine are both things that are called vasodilators. So even though you might not be in need of dilating your vessels, these things will dilate your vessels and send blood more to your skin. So you might notice that sometimes when people drink alcohol, for example, they sometimes will get really flush in the face, like they're blushing. It's because alcohol is a vasodilator. So I just wanted to mention that before we are done today. So that's all we have to know today for our video. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, please let me know and have a wonderful day. Talk to you guys later. Bye.